today's episode of the Epic IEP. It's going to be longer, but you're going to want to hear this. Do you ever get in meetings and you have the data, you have what you need? The district has the same data, and we start talking about the data. We put the data in the present levels, and then we move past the present levels and we write IEP goals. And then we get to the services that the student needs to be successful. And for some reason, this becomes a sticking point. And so many parents and advocates want to know why this is a sticking point. I'm just going to share this with you. This is one of my favorite stories, and I want you to learn from it. If we get stuck in the Epic IEP writing, trying to figure out why somebody is saying no to what the student needs, you're wasting your time. It doesn't really matter why. When I first started special editing in the 90s when I was young and still had a thyroid. And I used to think that the school was against me, that they could do all this stuff for my son and they weren't doing it on purpose. And then I figured out a little bit of the peek behind the curtain, and doing this almost 30 years, there's about 10 million different whys of you get stuck in those services places. I don't find it's money. I usually find that it's power and control, but either way, it doesn't matter. We, as an IEPT, are obligated to write an IEP to enable the student to make progress appropriate in light of their circumstances. So you've got to be ready for all the goofiness that happens when you talk about services and the schedule of services. And so we're in this meeting, we're writing this IEP, and we finally agree. Now, the meeting started out that she is doing fantastic, great, amazing, awesome, love her in the classroom. Okay. I'm not really sure what the word fantastic means. You have to quantify everything, right? So she didn't pass the state test. She doesn't do good on her district assessments. She doesn't do good on her testing. And she reads 13 words correct per minute in fourth grade. And the lady goes, yeah, she's doing fantastic. I said, so I wouldn't call that fantastic. The average fourth grader reads around 120 words correct per minute. So this is a massive gap. And she said she is not a behavior problem. What? We've got to stick to the four-letter word, ma'am, that starts with F. Fact. What is the fact? The fact is we have this deficit and we have to write minutes to support it. That meeting went on for 4 different meetings. We've identified the need. We wrote these goals. You have to have services to support that, right? And she had been in gen ed her whole time in school. So at fourth grade, how many years has she been in gen ed? She's been in school for 5 years. So we've done it your way. We're going to have to pivot, and she needs resource. Now, when you say resource, people, you know why? Because resource is probably one of the most expensive settings for special ed in a public school. And they were on the floor. We brought in attorneys. We brought in the director of greatness, the international coordinator for curriculum. She's there. We're so worried. You ever hear this in a meeting? We're so worried what's going to happen if she leaves the general ed classroom. She would learn to read. I know, but I want her to hear state standards. She has to hear state standards. Where does it say that? Like, just tell me where it says that, right? I want people in an IEP meeting to be able to tell me where it says that in the law. Because if that's true, it would exist here. It would exist in state expectations and guidelines. We make decisions on what the student needs. So after many meetings and many meetings and many meetings, we finally agreed that she needed resource reading. And she's been in resource reading now I've been with them for 5 years. She now reads 60 words correct per minute. What's important about that? She's going into high school. Average high school going in reads about 150 words correct per minute. Why was it so important to me that she gets special education and related services? Because the deficit is just going to be more noticeable the further she goes in her educational career, right? We often have kiddos that struggle in school, and because they're sweet and quiet and nice and not a behavior, they fly under the radar. And so when we get in these meetings and we have these meetings that are frustrating, funny, fantastic, we have to stick to the thing. And what is the thing? The student's critical, unique circumstances. And we are obligated to program and write an Epic IEP based upon what this kiddo needs right now. We don't wait. We don't say they're lovely. We don't say they're well behaved. We address whatever their needs are. And so I want you to know that when you get in these meetings, somebody at some point is probably going to say no. And it may be based on something you never know why. Don't focus on why, focus on what's next. Because for years as an advocate, I wanted to know the why of that people were doing things at a school meeting. It doesn't matter. We make the main thing that we write the Epic IEP so the student can make progress appropriate in light of their circumstances. And I know you guys are doing that. Keep being great. Remember, if you don't know if something is the truth, ask for it in writing, right? If somebody in a meeting is telling you we can't do that, or that's not the requirement or the expectation or the state standard, then just say this: can you give me that code and that statute it by email by close of business tomorrow? And sometimes you'll figure out that the why was not the why that you were thinking of. So we'll see you guys in the next training. Welcome to today's episode of the Epic IEP Gone Wild. And, we're going to tell you stories that are funny, frustrating, and fantastic. Hang on, it's going to be a little bit longer, but it's worth it. Have you ever sat in a meeting and somebody said something and you're like, there's no way that she just said that. There's no way he just said that. And then they repeat it. Have you been in those meetings? Yeah. So I was in a meeting one time and this kiddo needed a lot of support. She needed transition support. She had emotional dysregulation and behavior needs, and she struggled cognitively. She had a lot going on, right? She was not dealt a good hand when it came to academic or education or emotional readiness. And so a big team serves her, and we were talking about what was happening when she was in resource. And there are moments in meetings that just come off the rails. They don't like start to come off the rails. They're off the rails. And we're sitting there. It was a long time ago. Remember the olden days? We went in person. Remember that, where you parked and you went in and somebody scanned you. And we're sitting at the meeting. Mom and dad are right next to me because I'm their advocate. And all of a sudden, the teacher is so frustrated. And, we're talking about how we need to implement the IEP. We need to implement it as agreed upon. We need to take data, just regular things that I say. And she was just finally, she just lost it. And you could tell she's getting madder and madder and madder. And she was basically saying, without saying it, I don't have time to do that. There are other kids that are here and they want to learn. Did she say that? She did. And here's the thing: when people say stuff, you should believe them. You should believe them. And so I said, I'm trying to kind of walk that back. I said, I do know she has a lot of support. And that's why, she has a pair that supports her in special ed. And when she goes to gen ed for support, and she goes, can I just tell you, Karen? And like, she just lost a little bit. Do you know how much work she is? It's somebody's child. This is somebody's child. And I said, so, I don't know if she's a lot of work. I know that she needs a lot of support to be able to access her environment, access to the curriculum, equity, inclusion. And she goes, no, she is a lot of work. Like, she is the most work of any student I have to deal with. And I just couldn't even believe it. I said, so we probably want to take a break. Like, I'm like trying to help the team. That's one of the things at schools is that I don't see often that there's a lot of leadership at the school. Like, when something starts to come off the rails, that like, isn't the principal by law supposed to say we're taking a break? And like, nobody steps in. Nobody's like, oh, we probably should, put a pin in this conversation. And all of a sudden somebody else says, nope, she's going to get the support she needs. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Ms. Cunningham, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. That, Susie Luhu was not getting the support as outlined in the IEP, but going forward, we'll do that. And literally she stood up and she goes, that is it. I am not going to listen to this. And she literally ran out. And there's like 15 of us sitting there. And somebody goes, well, I guess I'll be the special ed teacher now. And so you can't plan for it. You can't understand it. You don't know why all of this comes in meetings, but I want you to know it's part of the gig, right? Special education is its own uniqueness, and people will just say things in meetings and you have to be able to recover from them, right? And not take it personal. I don't know what's going on in her life. I do know that serving this kiddo was not successful for her, right? And so remember, we're there to focus on the child, to identify their unique circumstances, and to write an IEP to enable them to make progress appropriate in light of their unique circumstances. So you guys go get the Epic IEP. It's epic. It's a playbook that I wrote for parents, educators, and advocates navigating the IEP process, because we're navigating it, and it's a process. And special ed would be great if it didn't involve humans, like human advocates, human parents, and human staff members from the school, but it does. And so we're going to work together to get it right for kiddos. And when we do that, they flourish, they succeed. And it's the best thing in the world to seed. And then, so thank you guys for what you're doing. Remember, when we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody. We'll see you in the next training. Welcome to today's episode of the Epic IEP Gone Amazing, off the rails, right? And so if we haven't met Karen Mayer Cunningham, hang on, it's gonna be a little bit longer, but this is gonna be worth it as we hear stories that are frustrating, funny, and sometimes fantastic, and sometimes all three, right? They can be all three at one time. So I was in a meeting, I was advocating for a kiddo, and I was telling the IEP lead, or the person doing the deliberations and sort of running the meeting, what the parent request was and those sorts of things. And I said, we need to at least consider the student doesn't need to be in this self-contained class all day long. There's an educational benefit from inclusion. We would like for the committee to consider resource for reading and language arts, and then in-class support for science and social studies. And the person leading the meeting, like, have you ever been in a meeting and everybody's agreeing and there's this one outlier that's like, no. And she's like, we are not going to do that. And I said, what do you mean we are not going to do that? We're not going to do that. I said, what do you mean we're not going to do that? Well, we don't have to include them in general ed. That's not always the right place for them. I said, I would agree with you that we don't always have to have a disabled child in general ed, but based upon the data and what you guys are saying and all the progress that they're making, it would be appropriate to consider, their least restrictive environment to educate them with their non-disabled student peers to the maximum extent possible, with supports and strategies and supplementary aids and services. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, LRE, least restrictive environment, it's the part of the statute, part of the main framework of IDEA. And she goes, well, it may say that, but I don't agree with it. Have you ever been in this meeting? You don't agree with what? That. I don't agree that that's right to have all disabled kids in general ed. I said, well, you guys take federal funds for it. Which means you kind of agree with IDEA and the implementation of it. And she said, well, I know it's federal law, but I don't agree with it. Do you ever have 52 things that you want to say in a meeting, but you don't because we're recording? So we get through the meeting, and here's the thing. This little book, how many of you guys, can you guys put in the comments how many of you guys had this book? How many of you guys were given this book when you worked at the school district? How many of you guys have ever seen this at a school district? How many of you know what this is? This little tiny book. So this is IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, not the Individual with Disabilities Education option. It's a federal requirement. And to have access to federal funds, every year your state writes a letter to Congress saying that they'll meet their IDEA obligations. So remember, it's a book of requirement, not a book of suggestions. Learn this so you're amazing at the next Epic IEP that you participate in.